Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Movie Nights movie review. My name is Dalton Burdett, and today we're going to be talking about Eternals. This is the latest film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the third MCU film to come out this year behind Black Widow and Shang-Chi. This film is directed by Chloe Zhao, who directed Nomadland last year and won the Best Director and Best Picture Oscar for it. This film also has a pretty stellar cast, so I know it might be annoying to see me read off a list of names, but I want to get them all correct, so indulge me really quickly as I lead off the main members of the Eternals. Gemma Chan as Cersei, Richard Madden as Icarus, Angelina Jolie as Thena, Salma Hayek as Ajak, Camille Nanjiani as Kingo, Liam McHugh as Sprite, sorry if I mispronounced anybody's names, Brian Tyree Henry as Phastos, Lauren Ridloff, as Makari, Barry Keoghan as Droog, and Ma Dong-seok as Gilgamesh. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. Kit Harington is also in the movie. He plays Dane Whitman, who comic book fans know who he becomes, but they kind of tease it in the movie, and I don't want to spoil that. But anyway, that's the major cast of this film. As some of you may already know, this is the first MCU film to ever have a rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it seems like it's going to pretty much stay that way, although it's about a 50-50 split. I haven't looked at the number since I previously recorded, but yesterday it was at like 51. So that's pretty even. Half the critics like it, half the critics don't like it. And those types of movies always fascinate me, and sometimes I agree that it's not that great. Sometimes I'm the opposite. Like the most recent example I can think of is The Accountant. That's somewhere around a 50%, and I love that movie. So you never really know. Those types of movies always fascinates me because it's just kind of, you always want to try to go into a movie with an open mind in the first place, but when it's a 50-50 split, you have to go in with an open mind because it's literally split down the middle. And I originally was going to record this video last night right after the movie, which is what I normally do. I normally record these at like the pits of the night and then schedule them to come out, in the morning or afternoon, but I wanted to wait and really collect my thoughts on the movie because it is a very story-heavy movie. It builds a huge world within the MCU, and I wanted to really gather all of my thoughts before I pressed record. And while I don't think this is a perfect film, while I do think the film does have some flaws, I think this is a really, really good movie. I thoroughly enjoyed Eternals. To start off, it is a very different MCU movie than other MCU movies, and this is coming from somebody, I don't think all MCU movies are the same. I know that's a common thing or criticism of the MCU, and while I do have my own criticisms of the MCU, that was never one of them. I can see the argument for Phase 1, early Phase 2, I can see that argument, but as it's gone, the films have been very different. They've gone into different genres and different tones, and I think that criticism really doesn't hold water anymore, but I will say this film is the most different of any film or television show in the MCU. It almost acts as a big sci-fi style epic. There's a lot to the story, and with a lot of story comes a lot of exposition. Some of the exposition is done great, some of it not so great, which is one of the negatives I have of the film. But in terms of the great, it opens with text, like many great sci-fi movies do, and it kind of gives you the layout of what you're about to walk into. And I don't want to say anything, I'm not going to spoil anything, but it creates major implications for the MCU, like world universe consequences. And that was one thing I loved about the film, because another early MCU criticism was how the individual films and not the team-up films had like no consequences on the universe, and that kind of changed with Winter Soldier. But still, the fact that they had these kind of stakes in the movie and set up this grand, vast problem was interesting, and it lets you know right off the bat from the movie. Another thing that the film does that I like, and I've seen some mixed feelings on this, is that when it tells its story, the lead, or like the one that you kind of take the journey with, is Gemma Chan's Cersei character. But with all of the Eternals, they've been on Earth for thousands of years, and how they tell the story is you are in the modern day, but then every now and then it will flash back to different periods throughout time. And not only does it give you fun set pieces and action scenes, but what it mostly does is it shows the dynamic between all the members of the Eternals. And some of the dynamics are completely different with certain members depending on who they're with, which I really liked. I thought that was fascinating. And I liked that it used those scenes to inform what was happening in the modern day, so that before you meet a character, you kind of see this is what their dynamic was when we last saw them, and let's see how it changes. The movie also asks really heavy questions, which Not a whole lot of MCU movies do it, and that's not a slight on MCU films, but, because I think the MCU movies are deep thematically, but not as sort of, in terms of a sci-fi religious concept. Like, this movie has a sort of God factor in it, and as someone who grew up in a very, very religious environment, seeing these characters struggle with who their creator is and the things that they think they're destined to do versus what they want to do. A lot of that was very fascinating, especially through the character of Droog. His superpower is that he can control people's minds if he wants to, and he constantly struggles with the fact that they're watching humans destroy each other in war and other things, and he has the ability to make it stop. He has the ability to help guide people along the right path by just stepping in for a brief moment. But a big caveat in the plot of this movie is that Eternals cannot interfere in human things. They can only get involved with these things called deviants when they arrive. And the deviants are both a positive and a negative for me. The design and look of the deviants are very cool, very scary. And, some of the action scenes are incredibly well done, lots of oneers, which I'm a slut for. But as the story goes on and it really gets into the third act, you kind of find out that a lot of the deviants are kind of... This isn't really a spoiler, but what you think of the deviants kind of turns out to be an extra thing that they didn't know how to resolve before the final conflict, so they let it carry over into the final conflict, and so that made it seem like a red herring, but it really wasn't a red herring. And so that story with the deviants kind of could have been shaved off or done better, but the look and feel of them and how they, fought the Eternals was very cool. The one exposition scene that really does not do a good job, and I don't want to give it away, but there's a sequence in which a character, literally for what feels like a long time, explains a lot of what you thought was true but isn't true. And later in the film, they even reveal more information done in a much better way. But this particular scene went on for a very long time, and it kind of stopped the pacing of the movie. And it was like, okay, I understand that this is important information, that we need to know this, but I feel like you could have easily cut that scene in half, and the second half of that scene could have been revealed a different way later in the film, especially because the exposition up to that point was revealed so organically and nicely that it became a huge stopping point in the movie of just like, you were doing it so well, why this? So that in itself was a little bit frustrating. But something that I also want to give props to the movie for is that it swings for the fence in terms of trying to tell an epic, amazing, century-spanning story with major implications upon universes and worlds while also trying to be one movie. And sometimes it feels the movie kind of buckles under its own weight. But at the end of the day, I think the positives shine, and while the negatives are speed bumps and you can feel them, they weren't enough to outdo some of the great positives in the movie. Another negative I have is most of the performers are great, especially Angelina Jolie, Gemma Chan. Some of the performances are weaker. The character of Sprite, while I didn't hate the character, that performance was one of the more weaker ones, and that's not a slight on the actress. I just think that character is very hard to play. And in the beginning of the film, I understood it and I thought they were doing a good job, but they give a monologue in the third act that is really bad. It was a bad monologue. And the monologue abruptly ends with a joke and something that happens that I don't want to ruin, and that kind of saved the scene, but still, it doesn't save the fact the monologue was pretty bad. And Richard Madden, in talking with Nick, a fellow movie night, I felt the same way as he did in that he was very stoic and almost robotic in the movie. And then as, you learn more about him and his character, you kind of get over it. But I still just remember the feeling of watching him for the first few scenes and being like, what's going on with Richard Madden? But by the end of the movie, his performance had grown on me. All the other Eternals are fantastic. Every other performance is great. The script is mostly great. And in terms of sequence of events, I really like how it played out. There's some dialogue that you can tell is trying to be poignant and mean something, but it just comes across as on the nose and cheesy. But then there are other sequences of dialogue and speeches that really got to me and really got me thinking about the bigger questions that this movie wants you to think about. In terms of the action in the film, I really like the action. The only other issue that I have with the movie is probably its third act. And not that the whole third act is bad, but that story I'd mentioned earlier with the deviants carrying over and how they resolve the problem, I really had to go back and think about it and be like, oh, okay, they did explain how it happened. But like while it was happening, it was all very quick. And for a movie that really takes its time, when it was back to back quickly doing things, it was kind of off-putting because I'm like, oh wait, I'm used to having a minute to think about this. Rushed, I think, is the word. For a movie that takes its time, the third act was a bit rushed. There we go. We got it. But I loved the setups at the end of the movie for how these characters can continue. I loved meeting these characters, the introduction of these characters, the implications it can have on the MCU and everything and all the other characters they can interact with. But most importantly, the movie we got. It was a movie that swung for the fences, 80% of the time knocked it out of the park, 10% of the time was fine, and the other 10% didn't do a great job. And while a majority of this movie is great, especially the cinematography, which I didn't even mention, this movie looks beautiful, and you can tell a lot of it is shot on location. While a majority of the movie is great, there are parts about it that just doesn't work, but the things that were great were so great that while I didn't forget about the film's issues, they seemed inconsequential to the things I liked about the movie. Also, the 2 post-credit scenes are awesome. I won't spoil them for you, but especially if you have any comic knowledge and you kind of know the stories they're setting up, they're good. They're really good. But yeah, the more I thought about Eternals, the more fondly I thought of it, the more I liked it. I'm definitely going to watch it again just because I want to see it again. And I'm going to give Eternals an A-. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you next time.